the look on everybody's face when I say there's 7.6 million blind people in America alone, blind low vision people, 76% of them are unemployed, right?
Yeah.
What? Like, why? Like, well, it's not by choice, let me tell you.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the See-Through Podcast. I'm your host, Lance Johnson, and I'm going blind. I'm slowly losing my vision to retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. And this is my podcast where I talk to the future of the blind and disability community. You definitely probably noticed already, but I'm rocking a cowboy hat. And that's because today I am talking to Lukas Simianer, who is the CEO and founder of Clusiv. What is Clusiv? Clusiv is the world's first e-learning platform that is built for and by blind and partially sighted people. To add to that, Clusiv is a training platform for people with visual impairments who have faced barriers when it comes to accessibility and adaptability in the modern workforce. In this episode, you're gonna learn more about Clusiv. We're gonna learn more about Luke and his backstory and why he has dedicated his life to helping the blind community become hireable. But before the episode begins, just make sure to subscribe to my channel. A lot of you listen to the episodes, but you haven't subscribed, and subscribing to my channel is the best way to help me grow this podcast. You can also help the podcast by following the podcast on social media. The handle is @SeeThroughPod. And if you want bonus and exclusive See-Through Podcast material, you can support the podcast financially by joining my Patreon page. You can become a member of the See-Through Few there. The link to all that's in the show description. And with the self-plugging out of the way, here's Luke. Lukas Simianer, welcome to the See-Through Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lance. This is exciting.
No, all good, man. You know what? I'm happy that I get to wear a cowboy hat for, you said it's Cowboy Hat Fridays at your office. I figured I'd join in.
Clusiv does have Cowboy Hat Fridays. It's funny, our team actually gets cowboy hat stipends.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What you got there? You got a nice Stetson there? What?
It is. It's a nice Stetson. It says, you can kind of see it, MFCEO. Yeah.
MFCEO, there was a old K-Swiss ad with Kenny Powers. Did you ever see that one?
No.
From Eastbound and Down.
Okay.
You ever see that show on HBO?
Yeah, I've seen the show, but I haven't seen the ad.
Yeah, and I think that's what it was. It was like the MFCEO, and Kenny Powers became the CEO of K-Swiss.
Oh boy.
It was a funny commercial. In fact, they shot it in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where I went to school. And I got to work on it, on set, because I studied film, and that was like my first production I ever worked on, and it was just all by being at the right place at the right time. But I love Eastbound and Down. This was like 2012.
Man, okay, that's absolutely crazy. Ago. So I was in the Army 2010, 2013. I was stationed at Fort Bragg the whole time. And Wilmington was my favorite place to go and relax. And I always thought about using my GI Bill and going to UNC Wilmington.
Yeah, that's where I went to college.
Yeah.
That's where I went to school. I studied film studies. And I grew up in Hope Mills, which is right outside of Fayetteville. That's where I'm from.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that, but I'm very familiar with Fort Bragg. It's like essentially where I grew up. So I'm used to the culture, the military, town, and all that it brings. And so you were stationed in Fort Bragg.
Yeah, and we were in Wilmington at the same time, for sure. At least a couple weekends.
That's funny.
That is.
Yeah, you might have seen me. I was young, 21, 22 around then. So I had just graduated. So I was out drinking a lot, to be honest with you. So maybe we ran into each other.
There's decent
Didn't know it. Well, man, I was going to say, I always start with the classic softball question of intro, get everyone acquainted. I got the cowboy hat on. I had the intro before, you came on, where I introduced you to everyone and who you are and Clusiv and all that. So it'd be nice to hear a little bit about you.
Yeah. I mean, Luke the CEO or Luke just the human? There's two parts to that one, I guess.
Let's start with Luke the human, and then we'll make our way to Luke the CEO.
Yeah, so Luke the human, I kind of like that phrasing. I might change my LinkedIn. So yeah, Luke the human, I like that. That's a funny way to introduce yourself, but I lived a life where I kind of chose to drink from the fire hydrant of experience and hard lessons, and lessons learned the hard way, I guess, more aptly. But I joined the Army at 17. I graduated airborne school while I was still 17, and went to the 82nd Airborne Division while I was still 17, all because I wanted to get out of high school and go do the thing.
So 17 years old, you joined 82nd Airborne?
Yes, yeah. I shipped off to basic May 5 of 2010.
And that was in Fort Bragg, like you mentioned, right?
Yeah, I joined the Army to travel, and they had the great idea of saying, well, North Carolina it is. Thanks. That's not Italy, but...
Definitely not Fayetteville either, man. The only reason I want to bring this up is because I have like I mentioned earlier, I have a personal relationship with Fayetteville. So for people out there listening, I grew up in a town called Hope Mills, North Carolina. It's a small town in North Carolina, but it's right outside of Fayetteville, or Vietnam. You may have heard of that phrase. And it's not the prettiest or safest, nicest place, but I do love it. I am loyal to it. And but Fort Bragg is what brings people in, and it brings people from all around the world because it's one of the largest. I think it's the second largest military base. So it brings in, and Fayetteville is a small North Carolina town, but it's very diverse. People come from everywhere. It's very interesting. But anyways, I just want to throw that out there, that that's a link that me and you have for the listeners out there, that you were stationed at Fort Bragg, which is right where I grew up, which is pretty uncommon.
Yes, yeah. It's,
but common if you're in the Army.
Yes, there's an interesting time and place. But no, I was in the Army. I ended up deploying a year or so later and got wounded in Afghanistan. And then I came home, and about a year after that, I was out, and I found myself kind of, meandering the ways. Worked a whole bunch of crazy jobs. I ended up finding myself in nursing school because I thought that was a good idea. And I did that, and I liked it. Didn't like actually working in that position, though, and eventually found my way into software and went to a coding boot camp. And, from there, kind of just found an opportunity and took off.
Yeah, I mean, you just said a lot very casually there. You're like, yeah, I was deployed and I was injured in Afghanistan, and then I went to nursing school, and then I decided to get into coding, and now I'm a CEO of a software. So it's like it's let's unpack that a little bit, because I respect the humbleness of that, but it sounds like you had a journey to get to where you are. And what to me that says about you is that says something about you, and kind of how you operate. It seems like you're not someone just coasting through life. You're looking for purpose. You're looking for experience, and you're looking for ways to help others. Because it's like you joined the Army, you went to nursing school. Those are all things that are almost like careers dedicated to society, making society a better place. And then now here you are with Clusiv doing that, taking that a step further. Is a little more niche because it's helping the blindness community. But would you say that how much has the desire to help people, am I wrong, or are you just having fun trying all these different things out? What is it? What's the deal there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's twofold, right? You could word it as the desire to help people, but I always looked at it as I needed something worth fighting for, right?
Yeah.
When you're in the Army, you view your country, your cause as what worth fighting for, right? When you're a nurse, you're fighting for essentially you're an advocate for every patient that is on your list, right?
Yeah.
If you're an ER nurse, boil it down even further, you're an advocate for life at that point, right? And in what I'm doing now, man, I have 7.6 million people that are worth fighting for. 7.6 million Americans. We talk globally, it's obviously a much bigger number, but that's how many blind and low vision Americans there are. And, there was things in between that didn't have necessarily purpose. I drove concrete truck as a cable guy. I guess those are helping people, but not as materially. And, I worked on the railroad. What did I do? My first engineering job worked at an insurance company, but those lulls, those points were kind of the lulls in my fight where I got really restless. And I'm like, all right, I need more.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to a lot of people, because, everyone has an employment journey that, it's, for the most part, it seems like I worked, did landscaping, and, I've worked for UPS Freight. I worked at a film studio putting lighting and grip equipment together for minimum wage in the hot summer, working in warehouses. I've worked at The Gap. I've worked at Ross Dress for Less. I worked as a production assistant on some TV shows in Wilmington. And then, I get a job in a marketing office, and then another one, and then a software company where I was part of their in-house video team. And then now I'm a freelance video editor. So there's always this journey of like employment, and you jump from one thing to the next, sometimes out of necessity for income, but also sometimes out of a fuel to kind of better yourself and progress, in your career, and also feel fulfillment and purpose. And speaking of that, that's what Clusiv is all about. So you yourself know what it's like to feel wanting more out of a career. And that's something that the blind community, I was looking at your website, and there was a stat on there that was like the average salary of a blind American is $27,000 a year. And, that's not good. Like, it's just no other way to put that. That's just not substantial enough, especially in this economy we're in right now. And a lot of the blind community is limited to very specific jobs that society has deemed that they are capable of doing, due to technological restraints and things like that. So this is where I think Clusiv comes in, and then we can kind of learn about Luke, the CEO, after this. But, so you had this kind of backstory of finding your path. You find your path. Clusiv's now in the picture. What is Clusiv?
Clusiv is the world's first e-learning platform built for and by people who are blind or low vision. So, almost 70% of our company is blind or low vision individuals. And what we did is we essentially identified the barriers to the modern workforce, right, which you correctly pointed out are mainly technological in nature. And the most granular and also kind of the simplest way to boil it down is if you look back at, the lowest ranking employee in an organization 10 years ago, they maybe needed to know how to use email, but they probably could have got by without it, depending on the role.
Yeah.
If you look at the lowest ranking employee in any organization these days, especially in tech, they know email, cloud storage, digital meeting platforms, if not multiple of them, everything from the Microsoft suite of tools to the Google suite of tools like Excel versus Sheets, PowerPoint, or Slides. And then that's before you even get into like job-specific software, right? And none of this is built with blind individuals in mind or assistive technology that they use in mind. And the regulations regarding accessibility are, well, they're a start, right? But they don't cover the modern digital age. And so, accessibility of itself is something that's touted around left and right, but it's not usability, right? It's like, imagine I can get into a store, but everything I want to buy is 7 feet up on a shelf, and I'm in a wheelchair. Right? Like, cool, yeah. It's accessible. I'm in here. There's absolutely no way I can perform the task I need to.
That's a great scenario to kind of paint a picture usability versus accessibility. Yeah, it's like, that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, because, one, you have such a cool story yourself, but two, Clusiv, what it's doing is amazing. And essentially what you're trying to do is change the game. You're trying to be able to prepare people in the blind community to be fully capable and hireable for this modern workforce that most of it's centered around tech, like you mentioned, just email, working the computers and using tech to be able to have these jobs, and therefore change that statistic of $27,000 a year average salary. And like, I'm sure there's other stats too. Like, what are some other statistics that are probably going to blow people's minds?
It gets even worse. The 27,000 is kind of generous, and it's collected. That one's collected by BLS, right? Which is using all sources of data. But when we go to like the point source, right? RSA, Rehab Services Administration. It's a group that falls under Department of Ed, and they're the ones that are responsible for administering all dollars to the state's individual vocational rehab agencies, which is who trains people, right? So their stat is that the median salary for someone who successfully graduates out of vocational rehab and gets competitive integrated employment, meaning a regular job that anybody else could apply for, that median salary is $17,000 a year. The unemployment rate,
17.
Yeah, the blind unemployment rate in America is 76%. 76% of this population is unemployed.
76% of the blind community is unemployed.
Yes.
Huh. That's way higher than I thought.
It's staggering, because it's not a capabilities issue. It's no one has created innovation up until us to break these barriers down.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And, let's talk about that. So how did you learn so much about, these kind of gaps in salaries and employment, low employment rates? How did that come into your play? Because you don't have a visual impairment. You're not someone in the blind community. So how did this all come together?
Yeah. So and I think this is a really critical point for anybody listening, is that, I didn't just one day decide to do a thing. I mean, you could summarize it to that, but my whole life experience, every adventure, every wrong turn, every left turn, prepared me with some tools, right? And the Army prepared me with one of these big tools, right? And the Army, by its very nature, you are living a reactive lifestyle.
Yeah.
You don't own your own life. If someone tells you to be here at 5 a.m. and it's, already 2 a.m. and you're like, I haven't slept, doesn't matter. You're there.
Yeah.
And you react. And your entire life for that time is reactive, right? What that taught me is that I want to live a proactive life, right? I'm going to guide where I'm going. I'm going to tell myself where to be at 5 a.m. or else someone else will be doing that for me. And that applies in a much bigger scale than waking up at a certain time, right? And so take that forward, right? And I was also diagnosed with dyslexia at a super young age, and thrown into a special classroom because they treated me like I was mentally impaired, right? And so I had to learn my own learning styles to succeed in any capacity in college, because I was convinced I was dumb. And so I had to overcome these things, be proactive, learn a lot of stuff, and do my own research to make sure I succeeded, right? I had to take ownership of that, which is probably the third key I'd point out. That being said, when you combine learning lessons from that path with what happened, there you go. You have some tools in your belt. And what happened was I went to this, I literally Googled, what's the fastest way to make six figures without going back to college? And people returned IT or software engineering. And I was like, well, I don't know. Engineering is like building stuff, and I like Legos, so that sounds fun. And, mind you, I'm dyslexic. I'm horrible at math. Computer science was never in my realm, right? It was never even in my purview, but I said, at this point, let's go for it. So I enroll in this boot camp, quit my job, take a big gamble, and I'm living with a girlfriend at this point with no money, and going to this coding boot camp, living off PB&J and ramen, and just putting my all into it, 13 hours every day. And at the end of it, I'm one of two people out of the 50 that were in it to get hired. I was the first one hired, and then I got my best friend, who was a Marine veteran, hired at the same place, this insurance company here in Austin, and the development arm of them. And a few months into working there, as a junior engineer, very much full of imposter syndrome. Everybody else had degrees and years of experience and was obviously way better than me. But a few months into working there, the CTO and the CEO call a meeting, and they're like, hey, so we're getting sued for accessibility. Our rating app, the app you use to go get an auto quote or a home quote online on your phone, it's not accessible, and someone's suing us, and we need to mitigate this rapidly. We have some time to fix it and potentially mitigate this lawsuit, but it's like quick. Does anybody have experience? And then everybody's like, nope, no clue. And CTO and CEO are just like, okie doke. And like a day later, it just comes to me like, my mom married this guy who happens to be blind while I've been out of the house, right? Like I was off doing my own thing. I was 26 at this point. Yeah. And just turned 27, somewhere around there. And so I didn't really know the guy very well. I'd been home for Christmas, said hi, had a beer, whatever, but kind of one of those things. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I could sit him next to me and have him go through the app, and where he finds a break, I could just implement a fix. So I called him. I said, hey, I don't know how much this will pay, but I'm pretty sure I could get you like a thing, and I want to propose it. Are you down? And he's like, sure. And, that was probably the most we'd ever talked on the phone prior to that. And so I pitched that to the CTO and CEO, which I sent them a Slack, and I was very nervous. I was like, sent them a Slack message, like, can I talk to you guys? Like, man, I'm probably going to get myself fired here. They're like, yeah. And so we have, a quick 10-minute meeting, and I pitch them the idea, and they're just like, can you do that? I said, yeah. They said, okay. And they bought me a plane ticket back to Omaha, where my family was, and I go up there, and in 7 working days, just going through this thing, me editing the code as he finds an issue with it, and me figuring out what permutation of this item I can make to make it work with the screen reader. 7 working days later, we had mitigated that lawsuit. There was no issues to be had, no complaints to be found. Perfect. And I got a big raise and a promotion. I was on cloud 9. I was stoked. Yeah. My stepdad was not. He was kind of downtrodden and depressed. While he was very invigorated and excited during the process, at the end, the culmination, the big hurrah, it's just, not feeling it. I was like, what is the matter, dude? I got you paid out for 7 days of work. Shit's good. What's going on? And he says, well, for the first time in my life, I feel intellectually valued, and it sucks because it's never going to happen again. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because, as I told you, when I got out of the Army, I worked a litany of random jobs that were not intellectually exciting, engaging, or things that brought value to me. I was valued for my shoulders and my labor, not my brain. And engineering was the first place I found that. And so I felt deeply for him. I looked at it, and we talked deeper and deeper, and found out that, he'd been an auto mechanic before he lost his vision in his 20s, and working on cool old cars, and then since then, and pretty much for the rest of his life, he'd be relegated to packing toilet paper in a federally subsidized plant for less than minimum wage. He'd never get a raise. He might get a title increase. But that was that. And that was life. And that was deemed a success by the state agency. Yeah. And that to me just is I got hurt for this country. I went to war for this country. I lost friends for this country because I thoroughly believe in the American dream. Don't always believe in everything our government does, of course, right? But I believe in the American dream. And no less, every single person who is here should be able to pursue it. Success isn't guaranteed, but you should damn well be able to get after it and try. And that's when it just kind of stuck with me. And I did more and more research. And, it was probably a year later that I just finally said, what, I'm going to do this full time. Because I couldn't stop messing with it. I couldn't stop learning about it. I couldn't stop writing code and then sending it to people, blind individuals, to test it and tell me if this worked better than that or vice versa. Yeah. And then finally, COVID hit. And the software company I was working for at that point was just like chaos. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna risk it. I'm gonna risk it all, and I'm gonna do the thing. So I started Clusiv.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot to unpack there too, and that's such a cool origin story. It almost feels like I could see that playing out in like a movie, like a scene. Yeah. So you have this really cool and unique origin story of the kind of reasonings behind, figuring that out. It happened naturally through like natural events. And then I'm sure once that kind of light bulb popped up over your head, you probably started realizing, these stats that we're talking about with the salary, unemployment rate. And then that all probably just lit a fire, and you were probably like, oh, this could be something I could help a lot of people with. And at the same time, I get to use my skill set, and that's always like something that I love, because that's essentially why I do this podcast. It's like I have this skill set with video production and editing and audio and, filmmaking. So like interviewing people and making products out of this is like something that I find fun and I feel natural doing. Yeah. So this is my form of doing that. And, and I was doing some research, before our interview, and I found something that kind of clicked with me, because it's something that I related to and understand. Is you kind of say you root for the underdogs because you consider yourself an underdog yourself. And I consider myself an underdog, I grew up small North Carolina town, went to college, worked on some sets, kind of figured out I was losing my vision, but decided to continue on in my career anyways, and end up in New York through a string of events, and I'm doing pretty well for myself, and I feel very proud of that, but I still have that same mentality of like, drive, and that's kind of what drives me to work hard and work like the amount of hours I put in my paid work, and then I have this podcast, and then I have other, but it's like, can we talk about that underdog mentality? Because I think a lot of people in the blind and disability community have that. They feel like they're not understood. They feel like they're not being utilized. There's a lot of very smart and sharp people in the blind community but it's like society's misconceptions kind of puts them in a box, and then also and it's just kind of unfair. So like I want to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I think the underdog thing is, you can count it in spades in my life, and really in most people's lives. I think the question is if they use it properly, right? I'm convinced you could probably be a billionaire and be an underdog, right? Are you from a non-traditional background? Do you look a different way, talk a different way, do a different thing? Whatever. Someone out there underestimates you, right? Or maybe they don't, right? Maybe not if you're Elon. I don't know.
Well, I always feel like I'm underestimated. It's something like internal with me, where I always feel like no one expects as much as I expect out of myself, and that kind of bothers me a little bit, Yeah. Like, and it's like, all right, well, I'll show you. That's kind of.
Yeah, it's this funny thing where being a veteran and going to raise venture capital, that's one thing, right? Like that in and of itself is a challenge, right? Being anybody that's non-traditional, you're not a 6 foot tall dude with rich parents that graduated from Stanford. Boom.
Exactly.
Anybody that's not that guy, VC, you don't pattern match, you don't fit the mold. Okay, cool. Add into that, well, I'm doing this assistive technology thing. I'm not building, the next crypto enhanced Web3 involved productivity platform that also happens to make toast, right? Like, sorry, I'm not doing that. I'm doing something that actually makes a difference. And, we get confused as a nonprofit. I mean, it happens to this day. It's kind of funny. And, and then we were selling into the government, right? And these are a lot of things that in the VC space are like, nope. And that's like one of the more recent versions of being an underdog. But I think in general, it's being someone that's underestimated, and understanding that, like, the status quo in this world is mediocrity or less, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to do better, you are an underdog. If you are trying to build something meaningful, provide for a family, provide for yourself, make yourself better, do anything that is above that status quo of mediocrity, there are forces in the world that you're gonna have to tangle with, and thus you're an underdog. So you better embrace that and understand it's not always that you have to prove someone wrong as much as it is that you have to prove yourself capable. And
that's I love what you just said, like prove yourself capable. Sorry to interrupt. That resonated with me.
No, I think the funny thing for me is it changes as a company, right? Me and my co-founder Tom, we will go, what we view ourselves as an underdog in changes by the sometimes the week, right? Sometimes the quarter. It was raising a seed round of funding, right? In this economy, every company is an underdog, but especially one that's as non-traditional as ours. If it's making good hires, if it's how quickly can we get the state to adopt the product? How many people can we get to know about us? In every which way, we define how we're an underdog and what we can do to prove ourselves capable and get stronger.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of interesting because it's like you were an underdog growing up, military, finding your path in your career, and then you have this success and you start a company, but now your company's an underdog. It's because you're a company that's trying to help the blind community, which is a community of underdogs, essentially. Yeah. And it's just kind of interesting because it's like, even with success, you're still, it's almost like the underdogs are your people. That's your community who you're trying to help. And I find that, in the sense, like, and that's why I have, a lot more empathy for people with disabilities than most people, because it's like a natural kind of barrier. It's like a real life disadvantage. It's like a true disadvantage. You know what I mean? That you kind of have to learn to adapt. Unlike something that's just in your head or somebody told you is a disadvantage. It's like an actual disadvantage. And I think there's a lot to that.
Well, and I think that if we stick with how did I phrase that? The status quo is mediocrity, right? Yeah. Well, if you have a moderate to severe disability, the status quo is below mediocrity. It's a degree. It's a degree of suffering, and if that is the status quo, let's peel that back and look at the layer of what that suffering is, and depending on the disability, right? Sometimes 100% of that suffering is due directly to what's going on, and that there's nothing anybody can really do about that, and that's horrible. But in a lot of cases, and I would kind of argue the majority of cases, the status quo of suffering, at least 20 to probably over 50%, somewhere in between there, is just made worse by society, by ignorance, by lack of awareness, by lack of people talking about it. And, the look on everybody's face when I say there's 7.6 million blind people in America alone, blind low vision people, 76% of them are unemployed, right? Yeah. What? Like, why? Like, well, it's not by choice, let me tell you. No one wants to spend their day sitting at home watching Bonanza, right? Maybe me when I'm 8. But, like, like, that's besides the point. And it's the level of fight that the blind community has in it is one of the most inspiring damn things I've ever seen in my life. It is honestly astonishing how, these are people whose entire worlds as they have known it have been uprooted within a moment, within a week. Sometimes they knew it was coming and one day it just stops. And their employers aren't supportive, their family doesn't understand, no one knows what to do, whatever. There's 1,000 stories. But the commonality in almost every one of those stories is, well, and then I said I had to do something. right? And when you start to hear that part of the story, you're like, and what was that something? And all what Clusiv is going to be and what we aim to be is, when people decide to do that something, they now have the tools in their belt to not let technology keep them out of the workplace. And employers no longer have an excuse to not make an inclusive workplace.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Spot on. There's a lot of fighters in the blind community, and like you said, we want to provide value. That's a big thing that I like to talk about, is providing value, actual value. Everyone can get online and tweet or whatever, but it's like what kind of actual value are you providing? Tangible value, and Clusiv is doing that. And I respect that a lot, because there's not many tangible things out there that's contributing and providing opportunities. A lot of people talk about it. There's a lot of awareness raised, which is great, but like, what's at a certain point, you got to start creating the opportunities.
The amount of situations I've been in where I'm on a panel or a group or an event where I'm speaking, and every single person before and after me is pontificating. Here's data. Here's data. Here's data.
Uh-huh.
Here's an educated idea on why. And I'm like, data's great. You need it, right? But let's go the next step, right? Pontification is, we can sit and talk for days. We've been doing it for decades, in fact. So when I come up and I'm like, well, here's the deal. Here's action, right? And if you don't do it, you suck. Like if you don't take what I'm about to tell you and execute on it, operate with it, have it in your consciousness, right? Like, then that's on you, because now we've gone from data to like you can actually do something, and you're not. So, and that's a weird moment for a lot of people. They're like, I've never been put in a spot like this.
Yeah, and that's probably has a lot to do with your success, is that you have an actual tangible product to sell, and that's a huge advantage. It's like, hey, here it is.
Oh, and for companies at this point, we're not even selling. We're just saying, hey, here's our talent pool. Let's get these people placed. Let's prove it. Let's de-risk it for the rest of the ecosystem, right? Yeah. And we've had some great people, start to come on board with it. So,
yeah, that's interesting. So, like, what's the next step? So, like, Clusiv it's got its feet on the ground. It's running. It's making moves. It's growing. Where do you see it going now? Like, what's the next steps? What's the future hold?
The lesson I learned in nursing is continuity of care, right? Okay. And I think that, it's not healthcare we're providing, it's continuity of access, right? So someone's in vocational rehab or some other program and they get a hold of Clusiv, they learn how to use these platforms. That's great, but that's like one time, right? How do we keep that going? And how we're going to keep that going is through our lifetime of learning app. And so people that have been enrolled in Clusiv for the rest of their lives will have access to our mobile application, which, like, let's say they go to a company that uses Microsoft Teams as their meeting platform. Let's say in 3 years, they move companies and that company uses Zoom. And they're like, I learned how to use Zoom, 4 years ago when I was using Clusiv. I don't remember. Well, on that app, they just go and they click training, meetings, Zoom, and whatever task they need to do. And they learn how to do it again. Right. And if Zoom has updated their UX in the meantime, or how something operates or functions, that's the next piece. Outside of that, with less detail, we're going to be creating a few mobile applications over the next probably 6 months. And the long-term view is getting us into community colleges so that we can increase, and universities in general, but increasing engagement in these remote classes, right? Because one of the biggest barriers to employment and education is, the accessibility of the platforms those institutions use. Beyond that, and what will probably be the biggest lift, but perhaps one of the most impactful to society, will be the K through 12 space.
Okay.
One of the biggest reasons there's a backlog of blind and low vision individuals in vocational rehab systems is because school falls apart at about third grade for blind and low vision children, right? And of course, there's socioeconomic differentiators too. If someone is not from a wealthy background or wealthy parents. They're going to a public school which has limited resource. And of course, the teachers don't know. There's no training for them on this. It's not their fault, but there's no training or resources. To put this in like context and get granular, what's happening in a lot of states is if your child is blind, the teacher sends home the book and it's on you to buy a $2,500 plus Braille press and then Braille that textbook yourself, which of course, if you've ever seen or felt or touched a Braille book, a Braille dictionary is about 5 feet wide, right? That's not really an exaggeration. So you're picking 20% of a page to maybe Braille. And that's somehow assuming your parent has the time and the knowledge of how to do that. It's a mess. And so we seek to change that at scale so that getting through school is like not some barrier, but merely a piece of life.
Yeah, I love that you're going, taking it even further and going back and trying to help kids, get skills early in their lives, in terms of technology versus, teaching them in their adulthood, so that way that they can learn a lot faster and learn and go deeper with their capabilities as they mature with their technology knowledge.
Yeah.
It's like me, learning to type, but now I'm, editing, so it all ties together,
Yeah.
That's great. I love to hear that. I look forward to seeing Clusiv grow and follow what you guys are doing. One thing I wanted to ask you is, what's it like, joining, because whether you like it or not, you're essentially part of the blind community now. How has that reception been? How has your own perception changed? I know you had that light bulb moment, when you were solving that lawsuit with your stepdad, but like, what else has happened in terms of your perception change?
So much. So absolutely so much, man. It's a great question. Let's see. It's funny, being a startup founder and a CEO, there's moments of pride that I have felt that, like, you do something cool in your life and you think like, man, this is it. Mm-hmm. I've had that 6 times in the past 6 months, probably. And it's not in things that I've inherently done. It's, I had one of our employees, actually our director of community engagement, Bruce, and, he told me one day, just not even meaning as a compliment, just like as a statement of fact. And he said, Luke, man, I love working here. I get to use every single bit of my whole life's experience. And it just like, it hit me in the deepest of ways. Cause I'm like, man, like, Bruce, being a blind man himself, he got his undergrad at UC Berkeley. He got his JD from Syracuse, right? He's a lawyer.
Yeah.
Gets his JD. He was the face of the Target lawsuit that the NFB filed against Target.com. Mm-hmm. Right? They've been places and done things. That guy still could not. No one would hire him. Couldn't get a job. They were scared of a blind lawyer. And here he comes telling me, the scrappy startup founder, that this thing that I've done gives him that level of fulfillment. I'm like, it made me cry. I'm like, holy shit, wow. And, then there's a moment, what was that, this convention for the NFB, National Federation of the Blind, in South Carolina. And I was giving a speech, and someone, at the end, there's a Q&A, and someone said, these jobs, are they actually going to pay livable wages? And I just made a statement of fact, and I said, we do not, and we will not ever tolerate or partner with anybody who pays blind or low vision individuals or differently abled people in general less than minimum wage. And our jobs, the roles that we target, the minimum is $55K starting. And the round of applause that I got was not for my speech. It immediately followed that. And it was the kind of clapping and moment where it is people expressing their pain and that someone has finally validated how wrong what's been happening is. And so to say I've been welcomed would be an understatement. But I'd almost say that that's aside from the point. The bigger thing is, like, we found our fight, and that's fun.
Yeah. It's a good fight. I support the fight. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, you're basically, what you're saying is you're speaking directly to the community. There's no middleman. You are saying, I know what you guys need, and this is what I'm providing, and it's not some like bureaucratic thing where it's like, no, this is what's going to happen. This is how I'm going to do it. And then that's going to create this level of trust and rallying around. People are going to rally around that. Just like your lawyer, you've provided an opportunity for him to shine and be his best self. And some people don't ever get that opportunity. They don't ever get that opportunity to become the best version of themselves. And sometimes it just takes someone believing in you, and then some things start to click within your own brain. Like, oh yeah, I am capable. I can do this and that. It's amazing how much momentum you can get from one opportunity. And that's beautiful. I love that. I've said beautiful like 10 times this episode, but there's a reason for it.
We got our cowboy hats on.
I think so. Yeah, it's definitely the cowboy hats. So you're based in Texas, Austin, Texas. Is that what the headquarters?
Yes. We're officed here in Austin, Texas.
Right on. A lot of growth, a lot of great things happening in Austin, Texas. I've only been there once.
It's the best food scene, the worst rent scene, and everything else is somewhere in between.
I encourage everyone listening, if this sounds, it's like something you want to look into, like, I guess that I'll leave it to you to kind of tell people where to go from here. If people are intrigued by anything, what should they do? Where should they go? How do they check out Clusiv? How do they get, involved in this movement you're creating?
No, definitely. So our website is clusiv.io, clusiv.io. On that website, we have forms. If you are a potential student, if you're interested in training with Clusiv, if you're a government agency or representative, if you're a company interested in hiring, that can all be found on our website. And there's tabs up at the top for each specific use case. Fill that form out. We'll be with you pretty rapidly. As far as supporting the movement and the fight, as we said here,
yeah,
following us on all of our social media channels, which I'm sure will be tagged, and we'll that right there, sharing our posts talking about this, and also sharing what Lance is doing. Honestly, we're on the same mission here of increasing awareness, and with awareness, making people actionable to have things change. So
exactly.
Thank you for having me, Lance. This has been a pleasure, man. Happy Cowboy Hat Friday.
Cowboy Hat Friday. I might have to adopt this myself, and just while I'm working here, I work from home, but just even though I'm by myself, I'll just pop it on. It gives me power, honestly, when I wear a cowboy hat.
We'll send you a Clusiv shirt. You can just have a Clusiv Friday.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. That'd be great. But yeah, I'll have links like Luke just said. I'll have links in the show description with everywhere. Everything that you need, links to social media, their Clusiv's YouTube website, all of that. And but yeah, back to my cowboy hat. My
important stuff.
My wife absolutely loves me in this cowboy hat. She's from London.
Okay.
So it's like when I wear this hat, it's like I'm like this like American like hero, like this American like. It's like some American fantasy or something. And it's like it's kind of funny.
I love that. I love that for you.
So this hat has some powers, man.
Oh, they do. The hats do have powers. We are firmly convinced of that here at Clusiv.
Well, sweet. And also one thing I want to promote, because I'm not sure when this episode will be out versus when, my episode with Clusiv is I'm gonna be coming on Clusiv's podcast this month too, so be on the lookout for that, where I'm the roles are reversed and I'm getting interviewed. So this is fun, man. I'm glad we finally were able to connect. Love your story, love everything you're doing. I'm rooting for you. I relate to a lot of what you said, And I'm proudly a part of this fight you're talking about, and let's help some underdogs, man.
Let's do it, Lance. Thank you for having me again, man.